Well, thanks everybody for joining us today at our next CTO member webinar. Great to have you with us. Today we're going to be hearing about the fundamentals of good governance with Govern With. So before I start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging all the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today, and I pay my respects to all elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that are here with us today. So welcome everyone. While I tell you a little bit about the presentation today, if I can get you to just jump on into the chat feature for me and pop in your name and the organisation you represent today so that we've got a record of everybody that's here, that would be much appreciated. And I'll just do a little reminder of that at the end to make sure I've captured everybody. So the presentation today is covering 9 key areas for effective governance: strategic direction, risk management and compliance, financial stewardship, service quality, clinical governance, governance relations, board composition, board processes, stakeholder communication, and continuous review and development. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, who is Fee Mercer. And Fee's joining us from Govern With as the CEO and founder of Govern With. She is a governance and director of review and development specialist, governance data and IT expert, and successful entrepreneur with 30 years leadership experience, both executive and governance, in the health and primary care, human services, education, not-for-profit and business sectors. She's a highly sought-after chair, director, governance facilitator, speaker and project manager, and has significant skills, expertise and experience in supporting boards and executives to review and develop their corporate sector, structural, constitutional, culture, behavioural and individual director governance roles and responsibilities for being effective and resilient. So before I hand over to you, Fee, this morning, just quickly, if you've got any questions today, pop them also into the Q&A feature, and Fee will address all those questions and concerns at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Fee in. Are you there, Fee?
Hello.
Hello. We're just getting, yes, there you go. Hello. Welcome, Fee. Thanks for joining us today.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much, Vicky, for having me, and a very big welcome to everybody here. I can see we've got lots of participants this morning. So, Vicky, that is fantastic.
No worries. Well, without further ado, I'll hand it all over to you, Fee.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, a very big good morning, everybody. It is very special for me to be speaking to all the community transport organisation executives, managers, directors, chairs, and of course, all those amazing people who support our boards. I've had the privilege of actually working in the community transport organisation sector quite a while ago. We had a bit of a project with Transport New South Wales, and we actually worked with and did evaluation programs with the community transport mainstream boards and also with the 5 community transport Aboriginal boards, which was wonderful. So in my presentation today, I'm actually going to use some of the beautiful Aboriginal art that we put together for that project, and I'll share it with you and talk about it as we go through. But as I say, it's an absolute privilege to be with you today, and I can't wait to talk to you all about what I've learned about the fundamentals of governance. So just to start you off, this is a beautiful picture of a turtle. And when I talk to the Aboriginal groups that I work with about governance, they chose to draw a picture of the turtle because of the wise old turtle wafting through the waters. And that, in their opinion, is governance. It's something that has been around forever. And I thought it was just a gorgeous depiction of the word governance as a beautiful turtle. So, what is the most frequently asked question about governance? The most frequently asked question that we get in all of our work is, what does governance mean, and what on earth is my role on a board? One of the ways that I've found it's best to help you actually understand that is to actually go back and have a little bit of a look at the history of governance. Now, as I said, when I work with Aboriginal boards and other groups, they talk to me about the fact that governance is nothing new. It's been around for 30,000 years. It's something that we all practice. But for those of us in mainstream boards, governance is actually something that, if we go back to even our Chaucer, Canterbury Tales, he talked about governance in the 1400s. And this is my favourite way of describing governance. Governance is about being wise and responsible. And when you think about trying to help people understand what is governance, what on earth is my role, isn't that a heavenly way of putting it? It's about being wise and responsible. Wise and responsible for the organisation you govern, wise and responsible on behalf of the communities we have the privilege of governing for. But where does our modern version of governance come from? Why are there these really important things that we need to understand in governance? What is it that we have to know what to do, and why is there legal requirements when we're on a board? And the best way to talk about that and for us to all understand it is to go back to where did this concept of governance that we now have come from? And it started pretty much when the first companies were around. This started back in the 1600s, back in England, back in Europe, and it all came about because the trade families that were around then, they didn't actually have companies, they didn't have a way of trading other than they owned the enormous ships, the enormous trade vehicles that went off round the Cape to Africa and so on. And when those vehicles or when those ships sank to the bottom of the ocean, they had to cover the costs of all of those things that went down with the ship. So hence that expression, going down with the ship. And entire families would lose their wealth overnight. And this was completely disastrous for the communities. This was completely disastrous for the wealth and the business at the time. So what they did was they actually came up with the idea of having companies. What it meant was that there was the ability to not have your name on the business. When the ship sank to the bottom of the ocean, it was actually a company, and the company took responsibility for the debt. And in return for having this incredible privilege of indemnity, what it meant was that there were certain rules you had to live by in order to be indemnified from having to literally go down with the ship. And these rules still apply today. And that is why when we're on the board of an organisation, whether it's a government-funded board or whether it has its own constitution, whether it's a company limited by guarantee or an association, we have to have governance, and that governance has certain things that we have to do in order to be indemnified, in order to literally not go down with the ship. So it's a really great privilege. And this is where our present day governance comes from. We have to understand duty of care. So you have to understand that on our watch, for the companies that we're on the boards of, or we're executives or board supports or company secretaries for, we have a duty of care to the people who work for us in those companies. Those sailors who used to go down with the ship, we actually have a duty of care for them. We have to make sure that their working environment is safe. We have a duty of care to the people we provide our services to. We have to act in good faith. We have to be seen to be doing the right thing. We do make mistakes, but we have to have absolute confidence and belief that we did do the right thing. We have to check our bona fides. Now, that's a really old-fashioned piece of Latin, but what it means is, did we do our due diligence? Did we actually check when we were organising things for the company that they were the right ones? When we hired those boats, to take our produce around to Africa and those other places? Did we actually buy the best boat? Did we do our due diligence? Did we manage our bona fides? And stewardship. Stewardship is all about managing the finances, but it's more than just managing the finances. Stewardship is about the long-term sustainability of the values of our organisation. Is, as a board and an executive, what we're doing ensuring that we're going to be here for the long term. And last but not least is assurances. Our job as a director is to make sure we understand what are the top risks and are we assured that those things are being managed. So when you think about it, being on a board of a company is actually a hell of a lot easier now that we have indemnity. In other words, that if we do these things, if we do them to the best of our ability, we will not have to go down with the ship. So my favourite definition of governance, therefore, is what are the board processes, what are the systems, and what are the behavioural attributes we need to have in place so that we can be wise and responsible. Being wise and responsible means that we remain indemnified. We actually keep this ship afloat. We keep doing the things that we're meant to do. So if you translate those key things into today's world, they pretty much mostly fall under the following 9 headings. Now, I've got quite a bit of information on the following slides about each of these headings. I'm not going to go into that with you today, word for word. I'm going to summarise, but I'm going to make sure through Vicky that you all get a copy of this because it might be helpful, it might be useful, it might be a little resource for you all to have. But what I'd like to do is sort of skim over the top of these things and talk to you about what are the latest things that relate to these 9 areas as a result of all of the boards that we work with, that we do review and development. The boards review themselves to see how they're going to these 9 or 10 key areas. And also individual directors review themselves around their skills matrix. And what I'm going to do when I go through this with you is I'm going to help you know what are the latest things that we as directors are focusing on. First of all, let's talk about strategic direction. And as I said to you, I'm going to show you this gorgeous Aboriginal art that is a reflection of what strategic direction means. And this is a wonderful diagram that helps us understand when we do strategy, we need to talk about why do we exist? What will stop us? How are we going to get there? And what resources do we have and who can help? A beautiful depiction of what are the key things relating to strategy. And the key things that relate to strategy nowadays are formulation. That is that we understand how to formulate good strategy or revise the strategy that we had before. One of the biggest things that's come out of COVID is the need to revise strategy more regularly. Once upon a time, you could set a strategic plan 5 years and just work your way towards it. But with the change, the continual change in environment and the continual issues of risk that we've never seen before that have been presented, we're finding that we're formulating and then overseeing, which is oversight, our strategic plans so much more often now. And the other thing that we're doing more and more of now is insight. So when you look at our data in strategic direction over the last 4 years, what has come up from directors is not that we don't set strategy as much and not that we don't even oversee strategy and make sure that it's implemented, but we as directors are not being strategic. And we're continually down in the weeds. We're continually worried about risk. We're continually dropping down into the weeds to make sure that risk or new risk that we never even understood before because of COVID, is that being managed? Are people looking after it? And what we've learned from directors when we talk to them is that one of the key things that assists us in our insight to be more strategic as a director is to actually know more about the business. Now, this sounds bizarre because you might think I'm encouraging people to be more operational. Not so. What I'm encouraging people to do is when we come onto boards, when we work with boards, is to spend more time in actually deliberately being shown what is the business we provide, what are our top risks, and how are we mitigating those. We also are finding that boards are putting on their agenda a deliberate time to be more strategic. They call it insight time. They're getting key stakeholders, they're getting other directors, they're getting managers to talk to them about what are our top risks, how are we managing them, so that when we as directors then ask questions, we are more strategic because we're more aware of what's going on. So it's a very exciting time, and we're becoming more conscious as directors that we need to be more strategic. This is a really important area for us to understand and talk about, and it's risk and compliance. Now, again, this is a gorgeous picture, and this is depicting the beautiful plants and the beautiful environment that we mustn't put at risk. It's, again, another area when you think about our role as directors, our first role is to understand the risks of the organisation, to understand the top risks. And we look at community transport organisations. The risks are quite unique. I mean, obviously there's the good old risk that all boards have, which is around finance and those sorts of things. But when we look at the quality and the safety of our services, those risks are unique and they relate to the services we provide. And our skill as a board is to know and understand those and to receive the sorts of reports that help us to know what are the trends, what's happening, what's going on in that area. And that relates to our risk reporting, and it relates to the risk systems that we have in place that deliver that data and that information up to our board committees. And our board subcommittees, a really important shift in what the board subcommittees are doing now is they are actually taking a much bigger role in helping to report risk to the boards. Now, traditionally, our board subcommittees just reported to us on the board by sending us their minutes. Now, honestly, guys, that's about as much use as an Astro and a motorbike, because those directors who were there just have to see it all again. And those of you who weren't there, how does the minutes of a committee actually assure you about risk? And if you think back to strategy and directors needing to be more strategic and come up out of the weeds, and they can do that by understanding more about the business, understanding more about risk, it's really important that we think at the same time, how do we bring the information about risk to the boardroom table? And more, our board subcommittees, led by the chair helping to deliver this message back to the rest of the board. What are the top risks that we've been talking about? What do they look like? And what is the reporting that we're going to be doing about it looking like as well? Now, I can hear a few of you probably thinking that's confusing because I thought these reports came through the CEO. Well, it supports the CEO because just having one place that risk is reported back to the board, i.e. through the CEO, is both a risk in itself and difficult, a hell of a big job and way too much for the CEO on their own. So you can see there's a real contemporary shift starting to happen in what is the role of our subcommittees and how are they helping us to manage risk better and report back to the board. Let's talk about finance. Now, this is an incredibly important area, and it's actually really interesting. When I first started reviewing boards at least 10 years ago, I mean, I've been working in governance since year dot, but actually deliberately just working with boards to help them review and develop themselves, as well as individual directors. Finance was, 10 years ago, the number one issue. Directors didn't understand their financial roles and responsibilities. They didn't, to the point where when a report was given to the board, everybody would look to the accountant on the board and abdicate to them and say, what do you think? What we've seen now is that broadly across the board, directors really are much more savvy about finance. The reporting about finance from the committees has improved out of sight, and they're probably leading the way on this notion of dashboard reporting and reporting to the boards about what were the top risks and what's happening. Having said that, again, we're looking to our finance committees to lead on this role, to actually support and help the board to have a better understanding of what our financial risks are. And but it's from a statistic and data perspective, it's actually really pleasing to see that if you look across all of Australia and all the different boards, the level at which boards are articulating their skills around finance, they are so much higher now, which is really, really pleasing. But that just means it leaves an opportunity for something else to be a bigger risk. And I think we've already started talking about that. And that is, how do we know about and oversee our other top risks around quality, safety, those sorts of things. This is about service quality. Look at this gorgeous diagram. It's just beautiful. It's really lovely. And service quality is so important, particularly in the community transport business. You're sitting on a board or you're an executive, and one of the things that you need to be able to do is hand on heart say, I provide a good service. But if you're saying that as a director or an executive, how do you know? And this is an incredibly important area that we in the governance role, and think back to our duties and responsibilities for having the privilege of having indemnity, sitting on a company or a company limited by guarantee or a government board. How do we actually know that we provide a good service? And this is another thing that we as directors need to understand. What are the services we're providing? Are we listening to the voice of our consumers and their families and their carers? And are we getting that information back to us in a qualitative, quantitative way? But from an accreditation perspective, that's not enough. We've actually got to know and understand, are we getting this information back in a way that we can be assured about risk, we can be assured about reputation. And then, guys, are you feeding back to those people who gave you that information? Are you saying thank you? Are you aware of services or practices or policies that were changed as a result of that feedback? So this is the one, along with many other kinds of risks, that we need to see evidence of a feedback loop from the governing body back to the people who gave us the feedback. And we need to understand at a board that feedback's great. Well done, everybody. Congratulations for getting it. But have we done anything with it? And have we thanked the people for it? The next area that is absolutely crucial on boards, with executives and with our new directors and with everyone really, is around governance relationships. And this is all about, and I hope you understand what this diagram represents. This beautiful diagram represents the diversity that sits around the camp. And this is how it should be on our boards as well. There should be diversity of representation. And this diversity in this diagram is highlighted by the different footprints. You know, there's the snake, the emu, the different animals, and the human there, and the other little animals beside them. This is about how is our behavior? How is our behavior to each other? So remember, it's the systems and processes, and we've talked about some of those in risk, but behavior is what sets the culture. And it doesn't matter how good your strategy is, if we can't behave in the right way, we actually cannot achieve some of our key goals that we're meant to achieve. One of the things that's very important in governance relations is the ability for the board to understand the difference between management and governance. And as I said earlier, one of the huge and exciting findings is the more you induct your directors well into your business, the more you give them a chance to have a chat with the CEO, a couple of managers, learn about the business they're in, the more strategic a director will be. And it's that strategic behaviour, that strategic questioning that helps executives benefit and learn from the board. It's really interesting. There's a real trend at the moment for what we call risk scenario discussions at boards. So I was talking earlier about how board committees are becoming more and more involved in bringing risk to the table and helping directors understand what the top risks are, what the trends are, and how are we tracking as a business. But there's also a trend that you don't bring a fait accompli about a risk to the table. You actually bring a risk that needs to be discussed. It could be a risk of reputation. There's all numbers of risks. And it's a really healthy activity for the board and the executive to get together and have a really good discussion about that risk, listening to the diversity around the table, and then seeing, do we need to change policy? Do we need to do things? And that really does bring that beautiful harmony between executive and the board together in a much better way. The board composition, this is incredibly important. This is all about our skills as directors. And it's not just our professional skills. Nowadays, we have a real focus on skills being relevant to the sector we're in. It's really important that directors, if they're expected to understand risk, that we have some diversity around the boardroom table of people who actually do represent the sector. We also need to have a diversity of professional skills. We need to have a diversity of contemporary skills, and contemporary skills are related to understanding ESG, which is environmental, social governance, understanding culture, being a community member, not just representing the mainstream community, but representing, hopefully, as well, some of our smaller minority groups, such as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, such as people with disability. Do we have that diversity around our table? Do we have behavioural styles diversity? It's really important to think about that behavioural piece. And do we have diversity of styles? Do we have, you know, a mixture of people who are drivers, who are expressives, who are amiable? And also, guys, we have to, if we want to have diversity around our boardroom table, we have to have an understanding of people's learning styles as well. And it's very important because we traditionally just roll out these board papers. We don't think about people who don't read or learn in that way. And are we taking time in our boardroom meetings to actually include that diversity? So our skills, they need to be broad, and we need to deliberately focus on that. Not a skills-based board nowadays does not just mean we have the right amount of professional people around the table. It's so much broader than that, and I think that is exciting. If you look at this beautiful picture, this reflects the diversity of those who should be sitting around the board. Our board meetings, this is incredibly important. Again, how are our board meetings run? How are they led? Do they bring to the table all manner of things? I guess probably the rule of thumb that I just love to live by is that in our board meetings, we should be a third of our time being strategic, deliberately agendaing strategic discussions, visitors to speak to us. We need to be spending a third of our time in oversight. How are we going with our strategy? Are we implementing it? How are we going with risk? What are our committees telling us are our top risks and how are we going towards those? So that's oversight. And if we don't do that, we are not doing our role that we promised we'd do, so we'd be indemnified. And third, we need to spend a third of our time in insight. Insight's an incredible skill of a board to develop. This is where we really welcome diversity. This is where we actually take the time to think about how did we go with things and did we do things the right way? And that's when we feed back to the people who are feeding up to us about what they said, about, are we actually changing policy to match what our consumers are saying? Insight's incredibly important. Are we hearing what the trends and issues in our sector is saying? So if as a board, you can get your board meetings to reflect those three things, you're a hell of a long way down the track. And it needs to be well led. Your agendas need to be deliberate to be able to do this. And you need to work in harmony with your executive and your board committees. This is huge. This is stakeholder engagement. Now, with my world, as I say, I have the privilege of reviewing and developing boards day in, day out. And for the last 4 years, or since 2018, we've been asking boards, what is your areas that you're the most worried about? And for 5 years in a row now, stakeholder engagement has been the #1 area that both boards as a whole and individual directors feel we do the least well. And this also includes consumer engagement. So that's the recipient of our care and their families and their communities. But stakeholder engagement is so much broader than just our consumer engagement. The biggest thing that boards need to do, along with being strategic, along with our oversight of risk, is understanding who our stakeholders are. And just like strategies changing on a daily basis, so too do who are our #1 stakeholders. And then we need to think about how we speak to them. Do we get them to inform our strategy? In other words, influence. Do we get them to influence our strategy? Do we then communicate to them what our strategy is and how they can actually assist us to implement it? And do we have a deliberate plan around that? Does that plan include our directors? And are we measuring in outcomes? Let me explain to you what I mean by measuring in outcomes, because right now, for our stakeholder engagement plans, we tend to measure in events, and we tend to, as boards, leave this role to our executive. And you could argue that from a governance perspective, it is the role of our executives. But you could also argue from a contemporary perspective that it's the role of directors as well. But the art is understanding what is the director's role. It's not a random role. It's something that's deliberate and planned and organised. But so too is measuring outcomes for stakeholder engagement, as opposed to just measuring the number of events. And let me give you a really good example so it will help you all take this home. One board that I worked with in South Australia, in Adelaide, they really understood with their stakeholder engagement strategy that it's not about 100 different events. Really, if you measure in outcomes, you might end up only doing 2 or 3 things and doing them well. So what they did was they actually ran a couple of focus groups with people with lived experience in the area that they work. They are in aged care and they look after people in their homes. But what they did was they worked with the board to work out to have the directors come to the people with lived experience focus group meeting as well. And everybody knew the questions that they were going to ask. And they got to ask the guests with the lived experience questions that related to self-determining care. It's very difficult to provide and train staff about self-determining care. As health providers or any form of providers of help, we want to intuitively support the person we're looking after and take over and do the things for them. But when you're going through accreditation, you're continually being measured by the fact that were you really providing this care based on this person's self-determination? And this organisation received a bit of a head over the head in accreditation about this. And it was believed that their staff didn't really understand self-determining care, nor did the families believe that their loved ones were receiving care that was based on their own desires. And in this focus groups, the board actually got to ask about, well, what is your view on this? What would you do? How would you think we should handle this? How do you think our staff should behave? What would you expect, either you receiving the service or your relatives or community? And all of those results were themed. And then the board set to, with the executive, it actually changed policy and actually changed the way they train the staff. Any of you who are trained nurses like me know that the first thing we do is say, give me your care and I'll look after it for you. Instead of letting the dear person walk over the rug, we move the rug away so they don't trip. The policies were changed, the training was changed. The board got back to this group and told them what they'd done with the wonderful feedback, and kept this group informed every 6 months about how that care changed, and also checked in with them on an annual basis as to were they more satisfied with the care that we were doing. This is the ultimate in stakeholder engagement. Yes, consumers are not your only stakeholder, but it's about meaningful stakeholder engagement versus an activity-driven stakeholder engagement. And I'd urge you all to really think about that and really see and challenge yourselves and go back to your boards and have a really good talk about this. Is this somewhere we can improve? And then last but not least is the real skill of a board is to actually lead and role model on continuous review and development. Continuous review and development is the culture that we want. If you look at any accreditation processes or any, it doesn't matter which legislation or which government area you are under now, what's expected is not just good governance at the top, but evidence of good governance through the organisation. And one of the things we can do as boards is role model that. And one of the ways you can role model a culture of continuous review and development, which of course is the safest way to manage risk, is to actually review and develop yourself. Review and develop your CEO and be actively engaged in asking and bringing to the table the continuous review and development of your organisation-wide culture. When boards ask the right strategic questions, it does change the culture of an organisation, because the questions we ask that then set to about the reports that come back to us mean that to get the data and the information for those reports, it impacts on the activity of the organisation. And if you're asking the right continuous review and development questions, particularly around the organisation's culture, the culture of engagement with your quality and safety areas, what you expect people to do to deliver the safest and most quality services, if you're asking the right questions about the sort of information you want, you will drive the right activity. It's a human phenomena. It's a behavioural thing that is where we as boards have the opportunity to be leaders on continuous review and development cultures by the questions that we ask. If we go right back to the beginning of my presentation, it's about the art of knowing what our top risks are, how they play out in our organisation, that leads us to be able to ask the right strategic questions. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to present these little snippets to you today. I hope that it's been helpful, and I'm going to have a little look at our chat here because I'm really keen to know if we've got some questions. Vicky, if you're here, have you seen any questions? I haven't clicked on this while I've been chatting.
No, that's all right. We've been listening intently to you.
Let's have a little look. Okay.
There's no questions at the moment. Things that came through earlier on were in relation to, unfortunately, the chat feature not being active at the time. So we fixed that one, and that was all good. But there's no questions that have come through. So I guess they're just digesting all that information. There was plenty of good stuff there, Fee.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome.
Well, I guess it is really important for people to feel that they can take this away, they can have a think about it. Please reach out to us and have a chat, either through Vicky or Vicky's going to send this presentation around. But Vicky, I'll give you a more extended version of it so that there's more information for everybody.
All right.
And people are very welcome, Vicky, to contact us. They can come and spend some time talking to us. We're available the whole time. We love talking about governance. Anything to do with governance, we're happy to help.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Fee. Well, thank you very much for taking the time out of your very busy day to present this for our a very big mix, I think, today. We've got directors, we've had CEOs, we've got just our members as well. So I'll put the recording link and your slides and make that available to everybody through our member update and through their emails so that they've got that as a bit of a reference point. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you everyone for joining in today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vicky. And Vicky, I see a couple of questions come through now.
Oh, have they? Good.
Send them to me and I'll answer them, okay?
Okay, if you like. No worries.
If the person is happy for me to have their email, I'm very happy to answer the questions.
If that's all right with you, Ben, I'll find out and send that through.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fee. No worries.
Bye, Vicky.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.